seems. Well, welcome everybody. Black History Conversations, season 12. We're wrapping up this season and delighted to say that we've got Rosemary Caldicott with us to tell us about her book, Voyage of Despair, which is a fascinating read. Right, well, so we've got with us a good group of people, and I'm just going to start with the official introductions to the session that we're doing today, and then we'll be able to perhaps introduce who's here and who's joining us on this auspicious time of the 146th session of Black History Conversations. So Rosemary, we're absolutely delighted that you're with us. So your book is an analysis of the pages of Captain Philip's journal to reveal the day-to-day brutality that defined the triangular trade. But that's not just what your book is about. It's about so much more. It's really timely and a fantastic read. So we start Black History Conversations with introductions. I'm Liz Millman from Learning Links International. I've got colleagues here, Simon Faringo and also Garrick Prayog, who are also a part of the Learning Links International team. So just to get us started, I'm actually based here in the UK at the moment. I'm in Wolverhampton at Bantock Park Museum, and they've let us have a little space, but it's very echoey, so I apologise if I sound strange. But I'd just like to say that Black History Conversations, the group of us who have worked through this and all our participants, Jackie Pennant, who's with us today, suggested that we also had an acknowledgement here for the injustice of the actions taken by the British and other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands of the Caribbean Sea, as well as the continents of North and South America. In addition, we also recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia, Australia, and the many other parts of the world in the centuries of colonialisation and ongoing exploitation. We acknowledge that this has resulted in the destruction and destabilisation of so many nations, peoples and cultures. But as we come together to learn about Black history, maybe we'll be able to assist with the moving forward. And Rosemary Caldicott was definitely involved in some of the challenges over the last years in Brecon. So next season, which we've decided we're starting on the auspicious date of Friday the 13th of September, we're going to be finding out more about the International Decade for People of African Descent. And we've also made quite a lot of links with people who are working on activities to decolonialise or to correct the museums and collections of archives. So that'll be interesting as a theme that we're doing. So we're just welcoming other folks to this session. So, right, I'm just going to introduce you then, Rosemary. I'll just stop sharing for a moment because we've got now Candice Chimbiri. It's lovely that you're joining us. Thank you very much. And we've got Joan Grant and June Elizabeth as well. Roland Hoslin is joining us from Canada. Karen Pritchard's joining us from North Wales. Jackie Pennant's joining us from Florida. And we've got Lucy from North Devon, as well as me, at the moment in the UK, and I'm in Wolverhampton at the moment. And we've also got Garrick Prayog joining us from the Wirral. And as I said to you, I think I've covered everybody, haven't I? Hey, that's really lovely to see you. See you there, Shambrise. Thank you very much indeed. Okay then, so I'll just go back to do my formal introduction to Rosie, and then we'll be able to find out more about this brilliant book, which I have to say is most reasonably priced. I'm going to say this up front, Rosie, most reasonably priced at £12, because it's full of so much useful information. Right, okay then. So in 1693, Captain Thomas Phillips embarked on a voyage from London to Guinea, that's the west coast of Africa, where he purchased enslaved Africans on behalf of the Royal Africa Company. So we might be joined shortly by King Charles because he's very interested to find out how the royal family had any involvement in this. I think the name of the Royal Africa Company gives it away rather. The subsequent journey across the Atlantic witnessed a tragic toll, with hundreds of the enslaved captives and many of the crew losing their lives before the ship reached the shores of Barbados. The ship, the Hannibal, is well known for this tragedy. Then fast forward to 2010, 3 centuries later, and in 2010, Brecon Town Council made a startling decision to honour Captain Phillips with a plaque. Brecon Town Council's decision to honour Captain Phillips with a plaque ignited controversy. In this engaging and original narrative, Rosemary Caldecott analyses the pages of Phillips' journal to reveal the day-to-day brutality that defined the triangular trade, uncovering the forgotten stories of the victims in this dark chapter of history. She also reveals the compelling story of the campaign to remove the plaque in Brecon, a campaign that finally bore fruit amid the worldwide Black Lives Matter protests that even reached to the heart of Brecon. So welcome, Rosemary. We welcomed you, I don't know how long ago it was now, over 6 months ago, I think. And you were telling us about the work you were doing and the challenges that were still in Brecon. And at that time, you didn't want us to record what you were saying because things were all so sensitive. So now we're absolutely delighted that you're back with us and that this wonderful book, Voyages of Despair. Thank you very much for sending me a copy. I'm much remiss of not having written the review yet, but I have been somewhat distracted since I got back to the UK, but I'm getting my way through it. It's a fantastic read. So over to you then, Rosemary.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Liz. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I ask how long I have to talk for?
You can talk as long as you like, Rosemary.
Oh, you shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, we're out of the building in an hour's time, so that's probably your limit. So
thank you. Thank you. A little bit of background about how I came to write this book. I was researching for another book I'd written previously, published 5 years ago, called Nautical Women. And when I was researching Nautical Women, I discovered that this was about women who dressed up as men and boys so that they could go to sea. And I discovered that a Black woman sailor had sailed on the Hannibal slave ship during 1693. She was discovered at the end of that year before they reached the coast of West Africa because she fell ill. And the nice little story here, the surgeon on board the ship, Dr. Gordon, Mr. Gordon rather, he sent his mates down to administer a poultice to John Brown. And the mates came back and said, I've discovered more Sally holes than expected. In other words, she was a woman. So anyway, she survived 50% of the soul. She was actually a soldier, private soldier for the RAC, but working as a Marine on the ship. And she, just a little add-on here, she survived. Most of the Royal African Company employees sent to the west coast of Africa would be dead, 50% within 8 weeks. But I found her on the muster rolls for the living and the dead at Cape Coast Castle, and she was still alive 6 months later. And I knew it was her because they'd written John Brown alias Mary Brown. So that had to be her, and they knew that she was a cross-dresser, and so that was just a nice little add-on story there. So to cut a long story short, that led me to think about, well, who was this captain who the mate reported to, Thomas Phillips? So I started looking into that and discovered he came from Brecon in Wales, which, as you probably know, is a landlocked town. And I thought, what possible connections could he have to the sea? And I reached out to a local historian there who said, well, come on over. I'll get you on a tour of his house, which was at that time a convent. So I went over there, and it was only after that walk around the house that I was told there's actually a plaque to this slave trader murdering captain, which I was aghast, you know. So a few months later, so this was actually 4 years ago. So 2 months later, I wrote to the local paper asking, why is there a plaque to a slave trader erected, and why was it erected in 2010? And basically all hell broke loose with the public, which forced the council to hold an online meeting, because by this time we'd entered the pandemic. 78 people, 78 members of the public from Brecon attended the online meeting, and the consensus was that the plaque should be removed. But the story is always more complicated than that. So Captain Thomas Phillips, who was born in the mid-17th century in Brecon, he wrote a journal, which is available on Google Books online for free. He wrote a journal in which, you know, he describes day by day, about his journey down to West Africa, very graphic accounts of his team bartering for the enslaved Africans, how they were treated on his ship, etc., etc. But he tells a story that he lost money on this voyage. So I set out to prove no, they still even though they lost more than 50% of the enslaved Africans on this voyage to dysentery, mainly 2 types of dysentery they suffered with, because Phillips had loaded contaminated water after he left the coast of Africa on the island of Saint Tom Principal. So I thought, right, I've got to write a book about this. It's a parallel story about the past, but it's also set in the present day, because the plaque was still there when I started writing the book. So I'm writing a parallel story about how the past, the heinous crimes of the past, are still with us today in the present. So that led me obviously to Kew, to the National Archives, to look at all the Royal African Company records. So I decided to write the book as a parallel story. So there'd be one chapter introducing us to about the story. The next chapter takes us to present day Brecon. Then the next chapter goes back to where Phillips was born, investigating how these children basically were selected to become officers on slave ships. I believe they were groomed from a young age by very prosperous merchants. They were looking for a particular type of person, obviously somebody of a tyrannical nature, somebody who could keep discipline over his crew during the most, dreadful conditions, trying of times, who would also be an ambassador, a negotiator with the African nobility, and also trustworthy with the millions of pounds of goods that were being sent down on these ships to trade for enslaved Africans. So they needed a unique personality. So I believe these very young, these boys from the age of 6 and upwards were probably selected and groomed. Phillips himself had a connection, a family connection to an extremely wealthy, powerful merchant family who originally made their money in Virginia, trading in tobacco, and also you know, importing enslaved Africans to Virginia. He and his brother, Jeffrey Jeffries and his brother John Jeffries, they inherited £150,000 each in about 1670, and this propelled them into immense wealth. We're talking about, in today's money, Elon Musk, you know. So this meant that Jeffrey Jeffries could buy up a huge fleet of ships to trade for human beings in Africa, ship them over to the new mercantile capitalist, you know, system that was operating mainly in this case in the West Indies. And Barbados at this time, as you're probably aware, you know, was the island importing the most enslaved people from Africa, being a British colony. So, you know, even though Phillips was trading for gold, for ivory, elephant's teeth, but not so much hardwoods by this time, that seemed to, but also rare spices, even though he was trading for these other assets that would be of value back in Europe. The main purpose of the voyage was to use goods they'd taken down there, which were mainly cloths and iron bars, and weapons, of course, to trade for enslaved people. That's where the money was to be made. So it's actually in the captain's, you know, it's really important for the captain to keep as many of the enslaved Africans alive as possible on the ship, because every time an enslaved African perished on that ship, basically, you know, he saw £3,500 going as well, because that's what, on average, he was able to sell his enslaved captives for when he reached Barbados. So an immense amount of profit was lost because of the disasters that befell the voyage, and hundreds of deaths, that he wrote in his journal that he'd actually made a loss, that he arrived back in London a broken man, the whole sob story. So I set out to prove, no, he actually still made a lot of money, and a lot of money personally as well. So I deconstructed his journal, and with the valuable archives that I found connected to all the accounts of the Royal African Company at Kew, I was able to tell another story, because his journal was a travel log. It was part of a volume of travel logs that was there to entertain people. You know, you had to be very wealthy in these days to be able to subscribe to a publisher and obtain a leather-bound volume. There's only a few volumes left that contain his voyage, and one of them is in the British Library in London. So obviously I went there to see the original copy. And, you know, you had to be wealthy, a wealthy gentleman with a personal library. You would subscribe to the publisher. These journals, travel logs, were also censored at this time. So you have to be aware that, you know, he wrote this in the late 17th century, but it wasn't published till 1732, about 20 years after his death. Now, by this time, there was growing public, within certain factions of society, awareness of the horrors of the slave trade. There was discontent in certain circles. It was beginning to grow. This was the origins of it, where people who had influence were starting to question the morality of the slave trade. So they had to begin to be careful what they published. And I believe that sections of the journal had been heavily edited. But there are hints in the journal of what went on. So, for example, he never writes of any cruelty or cruel punishments meted out on his enslaved captives. But I suspect an attempted mutiny occurred, because one of his crew, who was actually a trumpeter, his name was William Lord, and Lord attacked the boatswain with a knife when they were still off the coast of West Africa. For this, Phillips had his trumpeter chained to the deck of the ship for the whole of the middle crossing, which took 71 days. Now, I asked a colleague of mine who knows a lot about the middle crossing, and he said, well, that was a death sentence. In fact, Lord did survive. Lovely story. He ran from the ship when he got to Bridgetown. He stayed in an inn upstairs for 2 weeks, and when his money ran out, he got another job sailing on a privateer, an interloping ship that was actually owned by the governor, Russell, his name was at the time. So there you've got the monopoly of the Royal African Company of England saying nobody else can trade on the west coast of Africa. And yet they've got their own governor in Barbados sending interloper ships over to West Africa to do their own private trade and no doubt bring back enslaved Africans as well for their plantations. Because Phillips had told Lord that he was going to hand him over to the Navy when he got to Barbados. And his exact words were, because they know how to treat refractory sparks. So he was going to hand him over, probably for mutiny. But he doesn't use the word mutiny, because obviously for a captain, that would mean you'd be dismissed, because it means you cannot control your crew, or, so you'd be dismissed. So they never admit to that. But so if he could treat one of his own sailors like this, what on earth was happening to the enslaved Africans on that ship? He does talk about slave guardians who came from a slightly different region in Africa. He had about 50 on board. They were used to keep control of the enslaved, perhaps to report back about any, mutterings of a rebellion on board arising up. And he does say that they were issued with the cat o' nine tails, and they certainly did use the cat o' nine tails. So you can imagine the horrors that went on that ship. But they're edited out of his journal. Other journals, few journals that were published before his, before the public in Britain anyway was starting to have worries about the morality of the slave trade, about the whole system. They were being published with the horrors still within these journals. So I suspect it was heavily edited. So that's one aspect of the book. And you'll notice on the cover that I call it the Hannibal, its captain, and all who sailed in her, because I tell the story of the crew as well. I look into the crew. I found some of their wills. They were a multicultural crew. They came from different parts of Europe. I am sure there were probably crew who would have been black as well. I wouldn't be a bit surprised. We already know about John Brown, alias Mary Brown. But so I look into the crew stories, pro rata percentage-wise, and the same numbers of crew perished as the enslaved. And this was quite common, of course, because dysentery, affects everybody. So the crew suffered immensely as well. And this was so concerning for Phillips that when he reached Barbados and he was held over there for 5 months because of the French were there and they needed a naval escort to take the ships partially back to England for safety. He had to wait for that to be organized. But so he was depleted from 70 crew to, I've worked out, around 24. Now that is not enough to sell a 700-ton, 40-gun Guineaman back to England. you have to have on average the minimum of 30 men. So he was asking around for more crew, and I don't know. It doesn't. I've never found any letters, correspondence. There's nothing in his journal whether or not he managed to find any other men to work on his ship. But this was a common problem. So they would arrive in the Americas, in the Caribbean, in Brazil, depleted of crew. It was very hard to recruit crew to work on slave ships. As you know, the works of Clarkson, based in Bristol, with his survey, interviewing sailors who'd worked on slave ships, they knew they had a 50-50 chance of dying during the voyage. They were paid badly and had very harsh conditions to live under. Just appalling conditions, being on an enslaved ship. And of course, many of these men felt just as enslaved as the enslaved, because they would find crew by releasing men from prison, or magistrates would say, you're going to get flogged, go to prison, hard labor, or you could go and work on my mate's slaver, So, and some men, I'm sure, were recruited, which I do mention. I do write a bit about the sexual exploitation of the African women on Philip's ship. And of course, if you're a man who wants that sort of control over women, a slave ship would be quite an attraction, I think. And lesser known pedophiles. So, it's a dark area of history. And at times when I was researching and reading Royal African Company correspondence from their agents, writing about Phillips, writing about his ship. By the way, they rarely had a good word to say about him. They didn't like him very much. I had to get up and walk away and go down to the cafeteria and have a break, because especially when I'm reading, about the enslaved Africans, about the total disconnect, how Phillips could, on the one hand, be entertained by the African nobles, the elites, doing these deals where they were, bartering for the wonderful cloths he'd brought down, the iron that they needed, the iron bars, So he would write how wonderful the great men of Africa are, how much he enjoyed their hospitality. And yet, boom, the next day, he's at what he called the trunk, the prison where the enslaved were held, where the selections took place. And he talks about these humans as cattle, as nothing nastier. They're nastier than swine. They stink. Well, of course, they were obviously in terrible conditions. And it's just, that disconnect, they're all human beings. And yet, so I believe it was actually a class-based racism, class-based. If you're already enslaved by Africans, then that was acceptable, because they didn't go in and capture their own slaves. They would have to do deals with the local African elites. So All Who Sailed in Her is about the enslaved Africans. Obviously, that's part 4 of my book, although mentioned all throughout the book, and also the crew as well, because they are, principally what made the ship sail. So I thought their lives were of interest. In fact, I'm working now on part 2 of the story, because on her second voyage in 1696, to under the same orders, different captain this time, a Captain William Hill, he went down to buy 700 enslaved Africans, the same number as Phillips, and there was a crew mutiny when they reached the west coast of Africa. The crew rose up and took the ship and became pirates. They marooned, they set ashore in the longboat, the captain and 18 of his officers. So I think that in itself illustrates, how the crew felt they felt victimized themselves. So this was, you know, very much a class structure, the hierarchy within the ship, you know, the officers over the ordinary man. So you can imagine, if you're looking at a class structure, that hierarchical structure, where the enslaved Africans fitted into that, you know, so it goes without doubt how appallingly they would have been treated. But on the other hand, important to try and keep them alive. So they would be reasonably well fed, and given ample water, which they would need in the terrible conditions within the ship, of course. And there are stories of crew, which actually happened on Philip's ship as well, where the crew were put on short rations because they became marooned when they first began to sail across the Atlantic. But the captain would always put his crew on short rations, which, by the way, includes water. So they'd only be allowed pints of water a day. So you can imagine in those conditions how quickly you become dehydrated. So it was more important to keep the enslaved alive. So Phillips was devastated that he lost so many of his captives to dysentery. I mean, the average ship would lose between 10 and 20%. They factored that into their profits. They allowed for that many deaths to still be profitable. So I calculate in the book what they expected to make in profit from this voyage. I'm just talking here not about gold, not about all the other goods that they purchased. I'm just talking about the human beings that they were purchasing. So they expected to buy 700 enslaved Africans, which they did. I believe there were more. It was very common for more people to be purchased to allow for deaths. And of course, the captain was allowed a certain number himself to do private trading on the side. And that also was allowed for some of the officers as well. It's written into their contracts. But his orders were to purchase 700 enslaved Africans at £3.15 a head. But he was told if there was a shortage, he could pay as much as £5 per head, but no more. So I worked out if we do the upper limit of the expected death rate, I'm sorry this is so grim, but you know, it's all building up to why would they erect a plaque to a man like this, you know. But at 700 enslaved persons purchased at £3.15 a head, with the expected death rate of 20%. So if there were 560 survivors, that would mean a profit at £19.50 on average when they reach Barbados from sales of £2,625. So, sorry, so that was the purchase price, sorry. But when they were sold on average at £19 a head, they were going to make a profit of £10,640. Now, that's a lot of money. £10,640 today, if you work this out, GDP per capita, you're actually looking at about £15 million. So that was the profit they expected to make if 20% of the 700 perished. So that's a lot of money, obviously. They're making a huge profit. So I go into a bit more into the profit and losses. But what happened was, as I said, you know, a lot of them perished. And he actually, in the end, only managed to sell 372 enslaved Africans at £19 a head. So the profit was cut to £7,000. So, you know, they still made a good deal of money. So it wasn't true, as Phillips wrote, that they made a loss. And that's why, you know, he got sacked from his job. It's not true. The Royal African Company were able to make vast sums of money on one ship sailing alone. You have to think of an oil tanker. That's the only equivalence I can think of. You know, what is the cargo worth on one oil tanker? Well, it's worth billions, isn't it? You know, so what is the profit on that? It was exactly the same concept, you know, with these enslaved human beings that he was carrying on his ship, you know, and of course, you know, sorry. So I go into some detail about the Royal African Company, about how they set up to make a profit, how they regulated their trade, how they oversaw their captains, who, by the way, they actually didn't trust particularly well. They'd implant spies on their ships to make sure the captain wasn't delving in too much private trading. And eventually, as I go through the book and go through, you know, the Middle Passage, the horrors of the Middle Passage, looking at that voyage, I hope, from an enslaved African's point of view, and then his homeward bound passage back to England. So I eventually write about the legacy of Phillips, and I want to now share. This is a bit of a where is it? Here we are. So don't panic, because this is taken from another talk that I gave, but I want to show you an image of the plaque. I'm going to have to whiz through lots of slides here. By the way, this is the back of Captain Phillips's house in Brecon. That, as I said, when I went there, it was then a convent. It's since been sold, but it was a convent. I was shown around by two very elderly nuns. And that's a story in its own right. This is an image of the bound copy of his journal from the British Library. There's no portraiture of Phillips, but I've got his signature, which I found on a letter that he wrote back to the Royal African Company that has survived. Right, okay. This is the journey that he undertook, about 12,000 miles. You can imagine I go into sourcing food to feed over 800 people a day while you're crossing the Atlantic. Huge amount of food. I suppose think cruise ship. This is obvious. And this is taken from one of the account books that have survived for his particular voyage. So it lists all the goods that he was taking down to Africa to trade for human beings, including, as Liz knows, Welsh plains, Welsh cloth. So here are some facts here of what he took down there. 2,000 iron bars. Now that's interesting, because they were importing iron bars from Sweden, and then they were being loaded onto Royal African Company ships to trade for human beings in Africa. The Welsh plains were dyed blue and red. Now Phillips talks about this, writes about this, and Phillips states that the reason he wanted them, that they wanted them blue and red, was because when they delivered woven woolen cloths in West Africa, they wanted blue and red because the women would unravel this cloth and reweave the cloth into their local designs, which I think is rather lovely. So they would use the cloth to embellish their own designs. This is an image, a plaque about Clarkson. It sits on a pub on the harbour side in Bristol, a pub called the Seven Stars. And I'm secretary of the Bristol Radical History Group. And this is a pamphlet by my colleague, Mark Steeves, Cry Freedom, Cry Seven Stars. And we had this plaque made by a local artist about Clarkson's work, where he sat in the pub, the Seven Stars pub, and he was an abolitionist, and he interviewing the sailors as they came off, the ones who had survived, as they came off the slave ships in Bristol, about their conditions and about the conditions of the enslaved Africans as well. So he was gathering evidence, which was eventually given in Parliament. It's just names, John Brown. Oh, right. So I was talking about the crew. So crew outcomes. So of the 70 crew, I worked out, he had a battle, by the way, with a French ship before he reached Africa, but I managed to work out what happened to them. He had five of them desert as well, 2 of them before they'd even left London, and they made off with quite a lot of goods apparently in the middle of the night. So, you know, 25 survived, 24, 25. I don't know the exact number, but it's about that figure. Okay, it's a nice image. I tried to use images in the book from the late 17th century. Very hard to find. Most of them are from the 19th century, but this was the fort at Woodor, which is in Benin now, and this is where he actually went ashore and spent 8 weeks ashore, being entertained by the local RAC agents, being entertained by the African elites, and also this is where he purchased the enslaved Africans as well. But this is an image of the fort there. This is an image of the time, and it's interesting because you have the African noble sitting on his throne, I guess, or stall. I thought they and you see there are 3 naval officers sitting in the background, so they're being entertained. We see his wives behind him, and then we have an African merchant paying penance to the king. So they're going to have a great feast while they work out their deal. So I managed to work out how many women, men, boys, and girls that were enslaved on his ship. So when I see these figures, you know, that it always brings it home to me. Not very pleasant picture. This is Phillips, possibly Phillips, but he's got 2 enslaved men next to him. It shows the canoe behind and being taken out to the waiting slave ship. These ships, by the way, would be about 1.5 miles offshore. So, you know, it was here's a good image of it. And these canoes slowly got bigger and bigger to carry more enslaved people out as the trade grew. But it was fishermen, local fishermen, who adapted their trade to work for the merchants. Of course, many of these poor people, you know, being taken out to what would us, I suppose, appear as an alien spaceship. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. I mean, some of them, as Phillips writes in his journal, he says that they were meanful enough, you know, how dare they affect his profit margin, to jump out of the canoes and commit suicide, because within these waves and around these slave ships, there were always sharks lurking. So he wasn't very happy that some of them committed suicide. Okay, so I want to just move on. This is an old picture of Carlisle Bay in Bridgetown, which I know very well. And here we've got, as I, you know, that he worked, this chap Waller, he was a surgeon originally on a slave ship, but he became an abolitionist. So, you know, he writes about what he saw there when the ships were still coming in at this time with enslaved Africans into Bridgetown. This is what met them. So I can give you some figures here that the number of ships that were sailed by the Royal African Company, with the numbers of people on board. And we see here in if you look in the middle, 1693, 1693, sorry, we see there were 9 just over 9,000 people were boarded, with a loss of nearly 2,000 people. That's if you can believe these statistics, because captains were known to fiddle as well the death rates in their logs. But you can see that in 1697, over 10,000 people boarded the ship on the west coast of Africa. But during that year, nearly 2,500 lost their lives. So it gives you some idea of the percentages of lives lost during the Middle Passage. Oh, okay. So here is the plaque that was erected in 2010 to Captain Thomas Phillips. It was erected by these people. Now we have the nun in the middle was, sorry, the nun in the middle who's sitting behind the bunch of flowers. So she's on the far right, actually, Sister Bonaventure. It was all her idea. She was an ex officio council member on Brecon Town Council, and she was sort of on their history department, you know, so she advised them about history in the town. And it was all her idea to put a plaque up to this man, because according to her, he out of over 70,000 words in the journal, he wrote one short paragraph about it doesn't seem fair to him that people should be judged merely by the color of their skin and the fact that they're heathens and not Christians. So based on those few words, but completely ignoring the rest of the journal and the rest of the information about the transatlantic slave trade, they went along with it. So they erected the plaque. The local taxpayer paid for the plaque, and underneath was also was a bench as well. So you could sit there under the plaque to this mass murderer and relax and enjoy yourself. So there's nothing on the plaque that would tell anybody. Yes, it tells us that he wrote author of a journal, but it doesn't tell us about the fact it was a slaving voyage. It doesn't tell us about the number of human beings that died on this voyage. It doesn't tell us anything. So if you walked past this plaque, if you're a visitor to the town, or if you're a school child seeing it, you would have no idea that he was a slave trader. And this was to memorialize a man deeply involved in the transatlantic slave trade, which is just incredible. I wrote the paper, as I said, a local paper, and they interviewed me, and I said that, you know, it's unbelievable in this day and age that such a plaque should, you know, it doesn't explain that he was the captain of a slave ship and what happens on the ship, you know, and I can't understand, you know, where the council was coming from. And I say there's a responsibility that goes along with heritage and heritage interpretation. And that is that, you know, it's required to uphold morals and ethical values and to tell the truth. What is the point of having statues, plaques, street names, names of pubs, whatever, names, you know, names of houses, if you're not fully investigating what name? So I was making the point that, you know, it never should have been erected. So what are the council going to do about it? And after this, there was a flurry of letters from concerned residents, outraged this plaque was there. It would appear most people didn't know it was there. It's on a little back lane, by the way. It's not on a main street. So the council was put under a lot of pressure, and they had to hold, as I said at the beginning, an online meeting. And what they decided in February, let me backtrack a bit. In February, after that, my interview had appeared in the newspaper, that they had a vote, and 10 voted for a review of the plaque, but 4 voted that it should remain as it is. One councillor, she stated that it should remain as it is because Captain Thomas Phillips was a descendant of Welsh kings. So June the 6th, I write a letter again to the newspaper. This is the time of the murder of George Floyd, and I entitle it, "Should Society Memorialize a Slave Trader?" So I write this letter to the council, giving a bit of background behind this man and some of the facts and statistics. And it was, we see here people taking the knee in Brecon, as was happening around the world, in solidarity to the solidarity to people of color who've suffered at the hands of the police after the murder of George Floyd. There was, I believe on the day, over 60 people took the knee in Brecon town centre. They made plaques, beautiful plaques, and what they did, because this was during the pandemic, they posted them up along the river, as you can see here, so people could walk in the fresh air, socially distanced, and view the artworks. But that night, a man came along, ripped them all down and burnt them in a pile. He was caught on CCTV, and I was told at the time that the police visited him and gave him a warning, but that's what I was told at the time. So newspaper here reporting the Black Lives Matter demonstration, and also police to investigate because of this person who ripped the banners down and burnt them. And now we see that on Facebook, somebody posted up a local issue here. Why does Brecon have a plaque to a slave trader erected by the council 10 years ago? I think it says. I'm blocked by the view of faces here. And then somebody in the town started a petition at the same time to have this plaque removed. This is on the 8th of June. And by the 9th of June, it was gone. And it would appear that somebody, the same weekend as the Colston statue was removed and thrown into the harbour in Bristol, somebody came along in Brecon and removed that plaque. And apparently it was thrown into the River Usk. Now, the council retrieved the plaque, apparently, about a week later, and they've got it, and it's now stored in the basement of the museum in Brecon. And the council, on the 11th of June, put out a press release on Twitter, now X, to say that the plaque was under review, but it was removed by somebody before, they could take any action about it. It was noticed missing, apparently, on Sunday, the 7th of June. And then they put out a series of tweets saying that they are, of course, not in any way racist, and saying that they stand against racism and discrimination, and we're proud of our diversity in the town, and I'm sure they were. They initiate a town talk about what to do about it. And then they put out a notice here saying that after the successful town talk, that what they're going to do is probably reinstate a new artwork or a plaque to be commissioned focusing on the victims of slavery, or whether a piece of art can be loaned. In the meantime, they're going to they pass a council resolution saying that they are going to put the plaque on display in context in the museum. Now, this is in September 2020, and to this day the plaque is still in the basement of the museum. and no artwork has ever been commissioned. So that is the story to date. And here I have a list of about Phillips's legacy. I would mention as well that I realized as I was reading his journal that he was probably an opium addict. He suffered very badly with headaches. He possibly contracted Lassa fever off the coast of West Africa because he also became deaf, which is one of the symptoms of that illness. His doctor, Dr. Gordon, he died of plague when he reached Barbados, and Phillips was self-administering opium by this time. So I suspect that he was probably addicted to opium. But he died in 1713, aged about 42 years, a relatively young man. But he died at home in his lovely house, a relatively wealthy man. And I just wonder, did he ever think about all the people that he enslaved and all the misery that he brought upon those souls who went to live in Barbados? And I think that's probably about all I want to say. Obviously, the book goes into a lot more detail, lots of facts and figures in here for people interested in facts and figures, a good reference section, and it's 250 pages long. So it covers quite a lot. You can't talk about this story without looking at the politics and the mercantile attitude of the Royal African Company. So there's quite a lot of explanation about that in the book as well. So I wonder if there's any questions.
Stop sharing your screen so we can see everyone, please.
Oh.
That's it. That's good. Joan has got her hands up.
Hello, Joan.
Hi there, thanks for a very interesting talk. I was just curious to know, I've got two questions. I suppose one's a comment, one's a question. One is, I think, obviously the slave trade was outrageous, but we never hear much about the Africans involved. It was a trade. It wasn't that they were just, kidnapped, as it were. They were traded. You give them an iron bar and they'll give you a slave. I mean, that doesn't, I know your book brings that up, but I think a lot of other things don't, or they've got, textiles, whatever it is. So it was a trade. Anyway, that's a comment. But my question is, how much money does Thomas Phillips leave in his will?
Yeah.
Was he fairly wealthy when he died or whatever?
Yes. Well, he had the house, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and he left guinea rings to many of his friends, which was the custom at the time. He gave the local vicar the equivalent of £15,000 today, so he could buy himself a new robe. That would be a wonderful robe, wouldn't it? Velvet, I should imagine, embroidered with gold and silver. And he left an artist friend of his £3,000. So, he scattered money around. He didn't have any children, so he left the remaining assets to his niece. So the money then went down that line of the family. But I would just like to add that Phillips had several brothers, and one of his brothers was called William, slightly older than Phillips, and he seemed to be the main beneficiary of his father's will. He inherited the house, but Phillips was the one who lived in the house. It would appear that William was wealthy enough in his own right. He was a married man with children, and he lived somewhere else. But Phillips, when he got back to London, he writes in his journal, because of his deafness and headaches, that he'd squandered 100 guineas on barber surgeons in London of no effect. 100 guineas was a lot of money. So he was well off, very well.
Just thanks, yeah, cheers.
Can I just raise a couple of points, Rosie, from your presentation? Two things. You didn't mention St. Vincent in your presentation, and I know there was 164 slaves that Philip had on that plantation, and also received compensation for Camden Park estate.
Yeah, I did look at the slave trade compensation database. The problem is Phillips is a very common surname, and particularly in Wales. So I couldn't make a direct link whether that's the same family. I could only find one shareholder for the RAC, and that was a William Phillips that could have been his brother, who sold £1,000 worth of shares, but there's no addresses with these names in this case. So because it's a common name, I can't make the link. Phillips didn't have any, as far as I know, any children or married.
And in relation to University of Wales, St. David's College, you made a link there of his contributions?
No.
No links? Because what I have read, he made contribution to the college, value of 2,000, 20,000 books. So I don't know if that can be verified.
Do you have a date? Do you have a date for that legacy?
Let me just have a quick look. Around about 1817.
No, because he died 100 years before.
Right. So then that may not be the same person.
Exactly. It could be part of his extended family.
Yeah.
But looking at the birth, death, and marriages records for this era, for the 17th century in Wales, you know, first of all, it's very difficult to read the handwriting, and they're very common names, so it's hard to piece the families together.
Yeah, I mean, this reference is coming from UCL database. Yeah,
it's possible, but difficult to prove the link.
Yeah.
There doesn't, when in his will, he does mention various orchards and other parcels of land that he owns in Wales. There's no mention of any investments in plantations abroad.
Right. Okay, thank you. Do we have
Hi,
any
this is
questions for Rosie?
yeah. Hi, this is Jackie Pennant. Hi, Rosemary.
Hi,
Thank you for a
Jackie.
fascinating presentation. I guess what surprises me is that this happened in 2010. You know, I mean, if this was a couple hundred years, you know, ago, the plaque was there. Okay. So my question is, aren't there any requirements, standards that have to be met for a plaque or some kind of a remembrance, anything like that to be put? Doesn't it have to meet any standards before it can be put up there using taxpayer money?
It would appear not, Jackie. These decisions, even though it is starting to change in the last, I would say, 2 years, these decisions are taken from above, basically people of influence. They're not taken by it but using a consensus among the population in general. The local people are usually not consulted, you know, definitely in 2010 they weren't. You know, so it's you know, so this is something which is beginning to change in Britain now. There's been controversy recently about a statue that was erected in Cambridge. It's not linked with the slave trade, but I can't remember the person whose statue's of, but it's basically a really hideous, ugly statue. And the local people want it removed. So now the college has agreed to remove it because it's an eyesore, the local people believe, because yet again, they were not consulted. So there needs to be, you know, more involvement from below, I would argue. You know, what do the local people want? Who do they, I mean, there must be some people, it's the point I made at the time, who did some really good things in Brecon who deserve a statue. You know, if we're going to go down that road of erecting statues, surely we can find some good people who did wonderful things for ordinary people. So we're starting to address that now, but it would appear that even though taxpayers' money is being spent, I suppose it's by the people who've been elected to serve us. They're elected to make these decisions on our behalf. But I think after so many statues, etc., were removed during the Black Lives Matter protests worldwide, I think now there is a far greater awareness that the public have to be involved in selecting who's going to be memorialized. And I will add here that I write about it in the book. I contacted the church in Wales to ask them, have they undertaken a survey of memorials in their establishments to people with links to the slave trade? And they came back and said, no, they haven't. They are aware of this issue. As far as I know, at the moment, nothing has happened. But the Church of England, the commissioners for the Church of England, are having a consultation day, which I'm attending on the 1st of August, to consult about the results from their survey about all the memorializations, tombstones, you know, plaques, etc., that exist in their churches. What are they going to do about them? And so I'm attending that day because I'm very interested. The Church of England are undertaking this work at the moment of a re-evaluation about who is being memorialized in their churches. Then why aren't the church in Wales doing the same thing? Because in the cathedral, Brecon Cathedral, there is an area of the cathedral and there are very elaborate, very beautiful memorials to certain people, and they had strong links with the slave trade. Liz, just to say, I can't hear you.
Oh, what's happened there? Try again, Liz, because it was working before. It's not working now. No audio. Oh, it's blown up. It's blown up. I know Liz has mentioned this before in previous conversation about the Church of Wales, the period, the Church of Wales and the Church of England. So the Church of England had covered a much wider period. So the Church of Wales is relatively new in terms of timeline. So whatever was done on the Church of England include all of that.
The Church of England have not undertaken a survey in Wales. That's the church in Wales have to do that. It's that's their responsibility.
Okay.
Haven't done it yet, as far as I know. I haven't
Yeah.
spoken to them for a year, but
Yeah.
they are aware. They are aware that they need to look into this. It doesn't seem to be priority.
Is there any more question for Rosie on her presentation? Any comments, any questions?
May I make one comment?
Lucy, yes?
The comment I want to make is the Church of England as an institution from the top has undertaken to do things which I think most of us would approve of and support. But that does not mean that local action is being taken in your area, because people remain in different places and in different positions with different attitudes. So there is some work for people to do, and it's quite a good idea to go and talk to your local church, or, you know, including cathedrals or abbeys and other places too. If you think of Wells Cathedral, they've done some really good work and are a great model. But I would just suggest that anyone interested in that would look into that locally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good point. And we've always said local community activists and local history interest group are the people that should be looking at these issues. So your audio
I just want to.
Good, Liz. So you got to use the chat. Sorry. How strange. So is this book now available, Rosie, for purchase?
Yes, it is. Now you can order it online. There is distributors, bookshops, but it's best to order it through the Bristol Radical History Society.
Yeah.
Okay? Go to our website. Now we work on a non-profit making basis, okay? And we publish books about history from below, as really just to educate people at affordable prices. So we don't make any profit on these books. It's £12. That includes postage. If you want to order from abroad, then email us, because we do have to add on a postage charge for that. But if you're from within the UK, it's £12, and that includes post and packing. So if you go to the Bristol Radical History Group, you'll see a link to publications, and you might want to look at all our other publications as well, which you might find of interest. We've got a wonderful book called, I haven't got it near me on my shelf, called Wolfston to Colston, and that is all about the story, of course, of Edward Colston, or more in detail as well about the Royal African Company and about Bristol-based history in connection with indentured labour and slave labour as well. Yeah,
thank you very much for that. So on behalf of Learning Links and Black History Conversation, thank you very much for presenting your publication, your finding to us this afternoon. And those references that you've just given out will be shared. Of course, if anyone has missed today's session, it will be available on the YouTube when it's uploaded, as all of our sessions, so that people can revisit any of the session that has been missed and replay at their own leisure. So that is available. And again, blackhistoryconversation.com is the website for that. So on the screen now, we have some information regarding what's coming up. Family and friends are invited to Unbelievable Birthday Bash at Mash Pub. And this is this Sunday, the 21st of July from 5 p.m. And Jeff there is a member of the North Wales Jamaica Society, who is also a chef and a fireman. So he will be providing the subsistence and refreshment for this occasion. So there you are. The number is there to RSVP. Let Liz know if you're able to attend. This Sunday, 21st from 5 p.m. and the address is there. So please come and join us as Liz celebrate her 25th birthday in Wales. Okay, so just a couple of additional announcements. So Liz has mentioned the start of season 13 in September the 13th. So do visit the Black History Conversation website to see more information. And that's where the Zoom logging information is available. You can share that information with anyone. Let them know. They can also look back at previous sessions last week, the week before, last month, etc. So that's a very good resource available to anyone. And let me just promote the North Wales Jamaica Society for membership. We are recruiting new members, and we're saying friends of, so you don't necessarily have to live in North Wales, although we would like to find people in North Wales, but the North Wales Jamaica Society have a monthly meeting, which is the first Saturday of each month, And there you will find information and also on the Black History Conversation, there's some reference. There's a couple of other websites to be aware of. If you come across any individual that need any Windrush support, then we have the Justice for Windrush .co.uk, Justice for Windrush Generations.co.uk is the website to direct people to get information. And then on the site, there is contact information, email, WhatsApp, if anyone would like to speak directly with an individual or to get further information one-to-one, that information is there. We can then direct you to advocacy support to help with application via liverpooladvocatesforwindrush.org. So those are two websites to be aware of. Please share that information with anyone. It doesn't have to be a resident of Wales, doesn't have to be a resident of Liverpool. If you come across any individual that needs some help in understanding Windrush, then please direct them to either of those websites. There are people available to help and support them. So that's all the announcement I have. Is there any other points that need to be mentioned? June Elizabeth, have you got anything on the notice board that we need to mention?
I just wanted to say a big thank you to Liz and yourself and everybody that's part of the Black History Conversation, and wish everybody, because I said thanked Rosie in the chat for her lovely presentation. And I just want to wish everybody a lovely, happy summertime. I wanted to ask, you know, the North Wales Jamaica Saturday, has that finished till September, or have we got another one before they close? Is that finished?
No, we're using that session to connect with people, in particular with the Jamaican project. So we're using that to connect with people. It's a good idea to visit the North Wales Jamaica. It's actually abbreviated, North Wales Jamaica Society online.com. So it's not the full word. I'll put it in the chat now so that people can visit the site. There's more information on that site as
Lovely.
to
Yeah, Liz
when we meet
will
and
update me.
contact.
Yeah, Liz will update me. Thank you. She just said so. You know, I'm
But
not
yes,
wonderful.
what we're
with
trying to do is to widen membership, but also we're still trying to find local people living in North Wales that is isolated, people of a Jamaican heritage, whether that would be friend of or somebody directly from Jamaica residing in North Wales. We're trying to find those people so that we can offer some support to them, because we know they're isolated in North Wales, and we'll try and bring them out. So there will be opportunity to bring people to event over the next few months. There will be some event in North Wales that will target specific local people to come and join us. And we will keep you informed of dates and location. A lot of our activities in Bangor, within the town center. And there's plan also to visit the Penrith Castle. I've never been, so I will be visiting that place myself. So yeah, keep in touch and you will get information as what's happening over the next few weeks over the summer, because Liz is here until the end of September, somewhere like September or November or Christmas. I'm not sure exactly how long she's here, but she'll be here for several weeks to come. So we want you to join us in North Wales. There will be some activity. And one important date coming up is the Jamaica Independence is coming up. There are events going around the country, and then there will be Emancipation Day coming up. So keep in touch to know what's happening in North Wales.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just to say finally, Roland is over in Canada. He's in Halifax, and he's doing some, shall we say, roadshow, connecting with people from the Windrush generation in Canada. He's back on the 24th of July, and he will then tell us, you know, report back to us what is happening over there. And then, you know, we'll be able to get some news. So just to let you know that he's there now till the 24th of July. I think that brings us to the conclusion of our session. So thank Rosemary for our fine presentation and for all those who attended, so that we're able to support Rosie with her talk. She has told us how we can purchase the book, and it is very good value. So please go out and get it. I will get a copy from my central library. I'm there twice a week, so that's the best place for me. I will get a copy. And any further communication, please use the contact information that Liz has put out if you need any further information. So I think that's everything. The weather is warming up for the summer, so yes, I think, you know, summer is here. At least for today, it's here. We don't know about tomorrow, but it's here today. And June Elizabeth, just say big hi to Sir Cliff for us, please.
Yeah, I will do. It's just doing my dinner.
Yeah,
I will do. Yes, I will say good hi.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much then. So have a good afternoon, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Okay, one love. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.